All right, welcome back, everybody, to another trade recap. I've got three trades that I just took, one loss, two wins, for a grand total of around $10,000 this morning. So I'm about to dive into these trades, break down exactly why I took them, and hopefully you can start taking some setups like this yourself. Let's go ahead and get rid of all of this, and I'm going to go ahead and rewind to the 9:30 open. So this is when I start hunting for my setups. Like we always do, we start on the weekly time frame to get our higher time frame bias. So this morning, I was noticing we started trading in this weekly fair value gap, this bullish gap that we've got here, and we also have this weekly order block down here. Now dropping down to the daily, I was looking for some sort of reaction. It tends to consolidate whenever we touch a weekly level, but we also start to see some form of retracement, and that's what I was looking for today. So you see, I already kind of outlined it here, but we had this huge displacement leg. We shifted market structure here, and we also created this bearish daily breaker. So right off the bat, I'm noticing there are levels that we can retrace to. It may not get there today, but eventually we can start to see price climb its way up into these levels and eventually either sell off or continue higher from here with the weekly trend. So we weren't sure exactly if we were going to get up there today, but I knew we might get some sort of bullish movement in that direction. So that's what I was looking for. Dropping down into the 4-hour time frame, you can see we had that huge sell-off, and at the beginning of my session, we also had left this 4-hour fair value gap. So we had this 4-hour bullish fair value gap way down here. We were also in a massive discount, and I was also noticing some respect of this 4-hour fair value gap to the left. So all things were still lining up pretty bullish, but I wanted to drop down to the intraday timeframes just to get a better view of what was going on. So I marked out London high and London low, obviously, and by this time we had already taken London high, and I was thinking if we can continue past that order block right here, we might go down to hunt London low, but I also knew if we stayed respecting this 1-hour order block, we could potentially see us just continue up from this level and reach for either the midpoint of this 1-hour fair value gap or a premium level like we outlined. We also have this 1-hour order block down here. We won't talk about that yet, but this does start to become relevant later in the session. So let's go ahead and drop down into the 15-minute time frame. We had this 15-minute bearish gap up here, and we also had a 15-minute fair value gap here and this 15-minute fair value gap here, which was most relevant to where price was at the beginning of our session. So you see 9:30 open, spikes up into this 15-minute bearish gap and sells off from there. I didn't end up catching sells from up there simply because we were still at a discount level. So I only want to be selling as soon as we're at a premium. So I didn't end up getting in any sells there. We traded down into the 15-minute gap. We closed a little bit past it, but we were still respecting this hourly order block. So at this point, I still wasn't quite sure where price was going to go from here, but I was paying attention to these levels pretty carefully. So let's go ahead and drop down into the 1-minute time frame now. That way you can get a little closer view. For the majority of this movement and all through here, we were pretty much just sitting on our hands. Price was pretty stuck between these two fair value gaps, so there was no point in trying to catch a move to try to run to external liquidity from inside of here. So we wait, we stay patient, and my main thing that I'm looking for at this point is either for price to displace to the upside, signaling us to buy, or displacing to the downside and closing past this 1-hour order block and this 15-minute fair value gap. So let's go ahead and see what happens in price. And boom, you could see we get a move down at this point. So let's go ahead and see what it does after that. Now let's go a little bit closer into the 30-second to see what was developing here. And you see we have dropped through that order block, and we have also left some fair value gaps. So initially I was thinking potentially this fair value gap up here could form a setup, and then this fair value gap over here could potentially form a setup. And I'm waiting. At this point, I'm also thinking these could possibly invert. So at first I'm thinking of selling these, but now I'm thinking maybe we're going to get an inversion gap. So I still haven't taken a setup at this point. This is just what I was seeing in the market at the moment. So let's keep watching this. keeps going, and eventually we're going to notice it ends up getting some displacement. So we do end up selling off. The gap does end up holding, and we have now created this new displacement down here. So at this point, I'm thinking if we can get a fair value gap at this level before getting too deep into this gap below, I may be interested in taking a sell and try to target down by London low. So let's go ahead and see what happens here. We get a nice little gap forming right here. So this is what I'm looking at. And then we see we get a nice trade in that gap. I think I got right around midpoint, and my stop loss, it would usually be above the order block in this scenario, like right about here or even above the wick. But in this case, I did not like the risk all the way up here. So I ended up putting my stop loss right above the fair value gap candle. And this ended up being a little bit too tight of a stop, as you're going to see. So let's see how price plays out. Boom. And you see almost immediately we get stopped out of the position right before it ends up running in our favor. So the position still played out. The setup was still valid. However, we failed to account for the order block and our stop loss, and we probably could have got a little bit higher of an entry as well, maybe at that volume imbalance. But nonetheless, we got decent risk on there. We just happened to have our stop loss a bit too low. So we continue watching price. We see it trade down into this 4-hour fair value gap. So at this point, I'm thinking, it's either going to respect this 4-hour fair value gap, or we're going to run down to London low and that lower 1-hour order block. So let's see what ends up happening here. So boom, we get a trade further in here. And at this point, I'm thinking it might look good if we get a shift in market structure. But the only thing is, we've got this big wick over here, so we would actually have to close above this wick technically to be a market structure shift, and that's pretty premium for us to go above there and then set up like a 2022 model buy. So I was still waiting to see if that might happen. But at the same time, I started paying attention to the 15-second time frame, and you'll eventually see what starts to form here. We get a nice market structure shift right here, and we also leave an order block down here as well. And there is a fair value gap in there too, but I didn't really pay attention to that. I was more focused on the order block, but it does increase the probability when you have that fair value gap there. So when I dropped down to the 15-second time frame, I think I saw price around this candle, so I noticed it supported the order block and it was traveling up. I decided to go ahead and long that position. So I think I got in around there. My stop loss was below that order block, and I was targeting these internal highs up here. So these relative equal highs, but I was also paying attention to all of these highs in here too. But I was just noticing we developed a lot of low resistance swing highs that we can potentially take. So let's go ahead and see how this plays out. And you can see beautiful delivery to TP. This was like a little over a 1-2. I think it was closer to a 1-3 at the end of the day. But nonetheless, you see quick delivery, beautiful delivery straight to target. And we had that nice 15-second 2022 model setup off that 4-hour fair value gap. Now, I don't usually take 2022 models on the 15-second confirmation. You see on the 30-second, we did not really have that confirmation, but we did get that displacement here. So you still could have waited for the displacement on the 30-second because we still left a fair value gap after that displacement, and you still could have entered on that fair value gap right there. So beautiful. And on the 1 minute, you can see we pretty much just had this inverted fair value gap here. That was really the only signal you could have saw on the 1 minute. But that was the second trade, and you can see price travels up into some of these highs up here before eventually starting to reverse again. So at this point, I'm going to go back to our intraday chart, the 15-minute, just so we can see how price has developed. By now, we have closed below this 15-minute fair value gap. So this is now an inverted fair value gap. And we have also closed below this 1-hour order block on the 15-minute, but we had not yet closed below it on the 1 hour. So when we were trading this morning, this was still not closed below on the 1 hour. The candle was still open. So by now, I'm thinking we are trading past the 4-hour fair value gap. So we'll probably go for London low. And we have these relative equal lows down here, but if we are going to use this extreme discount level to reach back to a premium eventually, like we outlined on the higher time frame, then London low may hold. So that was the last thing I was waiting for. Is London low going to hold, or is it going to trade through? So let's go ahead and see that. See, we start to make our way down. And I wanted to note as well, there was also, I didn't end up taking this, but there was a pretty nice inverted fair value gap set up here for a sell. So that was pretty cool to see, but I did not end up taking that. So we're waiting for London low still. So price trades into London low. And at this point, I'm also waiting for this 4-hour candle as well. I'm thinking if the 4-hour wicks and respects London low, and we continue to wick up and respect the 4-hour fair value gap, then that's going to be super bullish in this scenario. So that's what I was waiting for during this time. So you can see after price trades into London low and that 1-hour order block, we go ahead and make a market structure shift and we get a lot of displacement. So at this point, I'm looking at this order block. I'm also looking at this big fair value gap that we left here, and I go ahead and draw this out, and I see that the midpoint to this is pretty close to the start of this order block. So I go ahead and just wait for price. I'm waiting for price to trade back into that level. We end up trading back to it, and I think I get in somewhere around this order block right here, and then I have my stop loss below this fair value gap candle low. Now, I would typically put my stop loss below the order block candle entirely, or at least below this low. But in this case, I wanted to have a little bit smaller of a stop loss. I want to have a little bit smaller risk. So I decided to put it under that fair value gap candle low. For my target, I knew we were probably going to reach up to this swing high / 15-minute inverted gap. However, I wanted it to happen fast. It did not happen very fast. So I actually ended up getting out right around the high of where this bullish candle traded to. I saw it go up here. I wanted it to retest and trade past the high. It was rejecting, so I ended up closing for probably a nice, 1 to 1.5, 1 to 2. But as you're going to see, price actually plays out this full move entirely, boom, and delivers straight to profit. So it actually plays out the entire move, does get pretty close to the stop loss, so I am glad I took profit where I did. However, you still would have been in that move, and it still went to target. So beautiful 2022 model delivery here as well. We had that market structure shift right there, fair value gap order block, and we did that off of London low, 1-hour order block, and we had a weekly fair value gap consequent encroachment. Beautiful trades this morning, 3 amazing setups. This first one just had the stop loss a little too tight, but that's all right. We made up for it with these other 2. So let me know if you have any questions. Hopefully you learned something from this market recap, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for other videos like this. Also be sure to hop in the free Discord. Link is in the description. And until next time, be blessed, and I'll see you guys in the next one.